Hello and welcome to Empowered the Podcast. I'm your host, Linda Brand. Thank you for being here. I know you have so many choices of things to listen to, and it means so much to me that you're here listening. If you're new to the podcast, welcome, welcome. I'm super excited as usual for my guest today. She is a boundary queen. Her name is Elizabeth, and she is a boundaries and relationship coach, and she helps women build skills to quit people pleasing. We all need help here. She sets boundaries and teaches us to say no without fear or guilt so that women can live the joyful and abundant life they deserve. As a school psychologist, certified life coach, and former people pleaser, she combines her formal training and lived experience to serve women from a place of empathy, helping them adjust negative mindsets and build their skills. It is all possible through God's grace. And we talk about spirituality here at Empowered the Podcast. So I'm super excited for this conversation. I met Elizabeth through a women's community that I absolutely love, a coaching community, and she's just incredible. So thank you, Elizabeth, for being here. I'm super excited to talk with you today.
Thank you, Linda. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I love all conversations in this space, so very excited.
Absolutely. I mean, this is so needed. Tell us a little bit about where this began for you. I know you're a former therapist turned coach, and I just love a little history, if you will, because I have a lot of coaches that are listening and entrepreneurs. And, we as women all struggle with this. I am still people pleasing. I have a default program. I've been that way for so long. I think it's mostly because of my trauma. I realize, like, you want to be liked by everybody, and that's part of it, right? So tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about you, and then where it began, and why you're on this mission, and this is your passion to do.
Sure, I would love to. So I think that I didn't realize I was a people pleaser until I hit a point of burnout. I think that as a child and as a young adult, I was socialized the way that a lot of women are socialized, which is be a good little girl, be nice, don't make problems, don't cause drama. You want to have friends, all the things. And I think part of why I didn't realize that was problematic is because people pleasing actually gets reinforced and rewarded. We get positive feedback from hearing things like, you're so cooperative, you're so easygoing, you're so selfless. And we're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I like that. I want to be like that. And so then without knowing it, our identity becomes connected with these behaviors. And then suddenly we don't want to stop doing that because I don't want someone to think I'm not helpful. I don't want someone to think I'm not generous. So we adopt, it becomes ingrained in who we are and how we see ourselves. And then the ego is involved at that point. And then, it's much more difficult to break out.
Mm.
So I went to school to be a school psychologist. I was facilitating individual and group therapy, working with other people on the types of things similar to now what I work on in coaching. And I thought, well, I know about all these things. I'm a psychologist. And there is a difference between knowing and being able to apply in your own life. And the breaking point for me was when I was 30 years old and I was at work and it was 10 o'clock in the morning and I was so exhausted. I actually had to close and lock my door and go to sleep and hope that no one would come looking for me because I was so tired. I literally could not stay awake. And the irony is that this was the day after I got back from a weekend out of town. You know how we go on these weekends? We're like, I'm going to reset. I'm going to recharge. I'm going to rest. I'm going to catch up. So I was supposed to have come back ready to go. And I was still exhausted. And
Yeah.
it was in that moment that I realized, no, I wasn't just tired or maybe I needed a relaxing weekend. I was exhausted from a life that was running all over me because I was saying yes to everyone and everything and trying to bend and contort myself to fix situations. And it was running all over me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I need to make major changes. And so piece by piece through some therapy, some coaching, personal reflection. I've read all the self-help books. I've read all the personal development books. And I was like, I need to change my life drastically if I'm actually going to be living it because I was going through the motions and I was exhausted. And so as I did that work over the years and positioned myself to actually be leading in my own life and realize you can do this without cutting everyone off. Boundaries doesn't mean like, oh, you don't have friends anymore, you're all this cold and selfless person. It's not that. And as I learned to appreciate that, it was like, I need everyone to experience this, because so many of us as women are living small, we're shrinking, we're accommodating, we're adjusting, and we're so
Yeah.
tired. We're
Yeah.
so tired.
Yeah.
And so that's a little bit of how I got here, and why I'm so passionate about helping other women to move through these things too.
Yeah. What is the first thing you noticed when you were, I mean, there's a couple things that come to mind when you were talking. Um, one huge thing was the identity, when you mentioned the word identity, because it's so key in what you just said, because we really have to become somebody different to embody these boundaries and change kind of who we are. So what did you notice right away, when you started on this journey, and like, how did people react and how did you handle all of that? And then, um, I just think also like the power, I was just having this conversation with my last guest, and we are drained. Like we are literally, with today's technology in life, I mean, I notice it. And so I feel like we have to protect our power and our energy even more than we did 10, 20 years ago, I feel like. So, but anyway, so what did you notice? And if you want to share any more on the identity shift that really has to happen, I think.
Yeah, so these things are so important. I'm so glad we're talking about this. So I think with identity, like at the core, I am still the same person I was before, but how I do that is different. And that doesn't mean, like, the irony is actually like we think with people pleasing that like we're giving and giving and giving everything to everyone, and like that they're gaining so much from our decision to sacrifice ourselves. The irony is like I had so much more to give when I set boundaries, because I was more full and it was more sincere. It wasn't like people weren't getting my leftover scraps of energy of whatever I had because I felt I had to give it. They were getting an abundant offering. Like if in Christian spaces, they call it a cheerful giver. That's an expression. It's like you are giving joyfully and generously because you have it to give. And so I think that I believe a lot of who I am is very similar to who I've been. It just shows up differently and in different ways. And I think honestly, in better ways and more sincere, because some of the times that we're like giving us people pleasers, we're doing it with a bit of subconscious resentment. And because it is coming at our own expense. And so when we've set the boundaries, and then we can give not just financially, but our time and our energy, we're doing it from a more full place. We're doing it from a more joyful place. Now, it doesn't mean it's always going to be easy and that everyone's going to love the transition. And I think the experiences that I had as I started making these changes were a bit of a spectrum. So in the most extreme, yeah, there were some relationships that ended because when I wasn't the one always calling, and I wasn't the one always making the plans, and I wasn't the one always doing this, it ended. And that hurt, but it's okay. There was other relationships where it was challenging because people when people operate in environments, the boundaries are not a part of how things are done. They have a difficult time receiving that if someone new sets that. So there were some people in my life who didn't know how to make sense of the boundaries that I was trying to set. Sometimes they interpreted that as, oh, you don't want to have a relationship with me anymore. You're saying that I'm being greedy. You're saying that I'm this. And it's like, nope. This is the big difference between boundaries and rules. Boundaries are about what I need. I'm telling you, I love you. I want to stay in this relationship. And in order to do that, here's how I'm going to preserve my energy so that you get the best of me. It doesn't mean I'm telling you what to do. That's a rule. Rules are about other people, boundaries are about ourselves. But there had to be some conversations because people were like, okay, this is new. And it was like, yeah, and here's why. And I would love to invite you into a conversation about that, because this really is just about me and my own journey and realizing I need to do things better. So there was some of that. And then there were some people who were like, awesome, girl, you should have set boundaries 2 years ago. And they were like ready for it. So it was a bit of a range.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
mean, who's meant to be in your life stays in your life. Who's meant, to exit will exit. And it's like, I believe like the highest good for all, exactly what you said. When you are filling your own cup first, you can give from the overflow. You can be a better mom, you can be a better, everything, right? Employer, employee. When you are depleted, you are no good to anybody and you do have the resentment. So I totally agree with all of that. So, um, so how do you help your clients build the mindset around this?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the thing is, like, it's not just boundary setting. Anything that we venture into in life, if our mindset isn't there, our skills are not going to follow. So, mindset is definitely where we start. In almost all cases, it's starting with recognizing. So, there's like a three-step process for eliminating negative thinking, which is to recognize, reframe, and replace. This is a model that I use. So the first step of recognizing, we have to get in touch with what is the story that we're telling ourselves in our head? What are the underlying belief systems that we have? Whose voice is that? Did we choose? Do we even agree with this? And so we go through a series of questions and interrogating as part of our reframing. But first, we just have to get in touch with where is it happening. So I have people keep journals and diaries of like, what were the thoughts that were running through your head today? When you were triggered to say yes to that thing you really didn't want to say yes to, what was happening? And just becoming aware is the first part. Then there's a process of reframing where we're asking ourselves critical questions like, well, whose voice is that in my head? Do I even agree with that? Is that true? How do I know that's true? Do I have any evidence to support that? Has it ever not been true? Is it even helpful? Sometimes, even if we think something maybe it's true or we're not yet at a place to realize it's not true, it's like, but it's hurting you. So, like, what would it feel like to put that down? Would you be willing to lean into an alternative possibility? Is that what you would tell a loved one? Because one of the things that's like we really have to get through with the mindset piece is like, if you would tell a friend the same negative things about boundary setting that you're telling yourself, then your mindset issue is around boundaries in general. If you would not tell a friend the same thing that you're telling yourself, then that's a you issue. That's a self-confidence and self-worth issue, because that means you agree with boundaries as a concept, but for some reason you don't believe you can set them. And distinguishing which it is helpful to guiding people towards the process of reframing. And then ultimately, once you've recognized what's happened, you've gone through this process of interrogation, reframing, which is ongoing because thoughts always slip in, then we're thinking about replacement. So what are the affirmations that you want to say to yourself before, during, and after a conversation around boundaries? What are the affirmations that you just say daily because it's part of building up who you are? And we work with people to develop these, to repeat them, write them in a journal, put them in your phone, put a sticky on your computer, whatever it is that you need, because you're basically reprogramming your operating system. So it's going through that, and there's different ways to do that, like in both in individual coaching and in the boundary bootcamp group sessions that I offer. We're doing this with our own thoughts and feelings, but we're also using role play, we're using scenarios, we're using other examples, because sometimes it's easier to see it in someone else, and then we can make some application to ourselves, over time. So that's a little bit of the process.
I think one thing that comes to mind is when I study the Four Agreements book, where one of the four agreements is to never take things personal. So if you live your life this way, right, you realize that other people's actions and inactions have nothing to do with you. So when you embody that, it's a lot easier to preserve your energy and not respond because it's not your issue. Other people, that's like something key that I think your reframe probably is around also, is that like how others react is not our business, right? I mean, and you said things so eloquently, like, I invite you to this and, to have this conversation and, this is what I need to do for me. And like you're saying, I still love you. And there's like different ways to tell people. And people just understand. Like my son, I like to say, he's always like, he's literally the king of boundaries. Like I literally do not know another. He is incredible with boundaries, and you either accept it. If you don't like it, like,
Yeah.
okay, bye-bye, right? It's like,
Mhm.
this is who I am. And he's a kind, loving soul, but this is just
Yeah.
how he operates. Like you said,
Yeah.
operating system.
Yeah.
So, and it's so important in today's world, especially with technology and the texting and, people like wanting responses and different things. It's wild. So tell us a little bit the spiritual aspect. Do you practice, like, does that come into play? Because you mentioned,
So for me and my own journey, absolutely. So I'm a Christian and my faith is very important to me. That's like the center and the foundation of who I am. And it was very central to my own growth process because what I realized was like I was professing to be a believer in the things that Jesus taught and that the Bible says about how God loves us, but I wasn't living that way. Like, and re-anchoring my identity as a child of God was essential to being able to choose myself and the things that worked for me, to honor the things that I needed, and to not feel like I had to shrink. Because it's like, if I already know who I am, then the relationships that I have in this world, they are important to me, but they are not defining who I am. So for me personally, faith was a huge part of my personal development journey. Now, in my practice, if other people are believers and they prefer or desire for faith to be a part of the conversation, then I can honor that, but I don't require that
yeah,
because I respect that not everyone is in the same spot. And, that's not a part of the journey that they want to include.
yeah. So tell us, like, how long did it take you to, and are you still practicing? Like, tell
We're
us.
always in recovery.
I know, right?
There's no end date. I think yeah, so it doesn't ever like end. There's no certificate, because I have the degrees already in psychology and I'm still working on it. So there's no end date.
Yeah.
But I would say like heavy into working on it, probably like 2 to 3 years of like heavy work, maybe even 3 to 5 of like continuing to restructure. And then I think beyond that is a matter of like maintenance, refining. New situations will come up. Like in the course of the, let's say, 10-ish years that I've been working on this, I had a daughter with someone that I was not married to. So you can imagine that required some new boundaries. There's relationships with in-laws. I've moved across the country, started new jobs, like all types of life circumstances have happened. And in that, it requires constant reevaluation, negotiating as a parent. Oh my gosh, that's a whole other topic, which
Yeah.
is like, can we have boundaries with our children? My personal belief is yes, and we need to, but that's an area where like there's
Yeah.
so many opinions and that's constantly being refined.
Yeah, yeah. I was a single mother, so I have high respect and regard, and I didn't marry my son's father either, so we have
Yeah.
that in common. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely a challenge. How important is self-love in this? Isn't this the core? It's like the core,
Yeah, of
the,
course.
the basis, right?
I
So
think absolutely, yeah. I think like you have to believe that you deserve it. And one of the big things that I work on with people early on in their growth process is distinguishing, do they believe they have a problem of will or a problem of skill? A problem of will is like, I know how to set boundaries if I want to, but I'm afraid. I don't believe I deserve it. I'm resisting it for some reason. I don't want to go there. Deep down, I don't believe they really deserve it. Or even if they believe they deserve it, they don't believe that the people they're in relationships with will honor that. And they have chosen that relationship over the risk of being alone. And so that is a whole
yeah.
side of it. Now, skill is like, oh, I deserve it. I know I need it and I want to do it. I just don't know how. So teach me the how. And so there's different pathways and both are necessary.
Oh yeah.
Definitely.
Oh yeah. I mean, when you touched on the voices in the head and is this self-worth and self this, and I'm like, oh, absolutely, because that is the core to everything is, I think, is the self-love. Because if you don't value yourself, you are going to be looking for external, validation and, all the time, and basically having a lot of fear around losing people or fear around disappointing others because, I was that person. I didn't know that I was doing that, but wow, when you really learn, you're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh my gosh. Like I literally, I mean, we live in this society where, like, with this technology, that you have to be able to focus. Focus is a superpower right now, right?
Yeah.
Focus is a superpower. And to be able to like get something done when you have this email come over and this text and this person and it's like, you've got to stay focused. And so that's where boundaries like are very
Absolutely.
required. They're required. Like in the entrepreneurial journey, like I have just grown so much. And part of that is the boundaries. But I will tell a quick story that made me realize that I still have work to do. We all do, but I was in a little bumper to bumper. Someone bumped my, rear-ended me. And this man behind, so anyway, it was like I was exiting a parking lot onto a busy road and I'm in that like section and she hits me and I get out and like this guy and her car's all smashed, mine is not. And I'm okay basically, but the guy behind her is in a truck and he's like yelling and like telling me to hurry up and like he's got to be somewhere. And I allowed a total stranger that I don't know that's angry to stop me from doing the right thing. I didn't get her license. I didn't take a picture of her license or her anything. And I just rushed out of there because I mean, I didn't rush, but I left the scene. I left and I was so angry with myself, which of course that didn't last because I just come with compassion after I want to be, but I said, this will never happen to me again. There's the blessing. This will never happen to me again. But when it happened, and I was just like, how did I allow a complete freaking stranger that I don't even know? Like that was literally a sign, that I'm still.
Well, I think that that's so relatable because so many times we have this feeling of like, I'm healed, I'm done. And then a certain situation triggers us in different ways and we go into fight or flight and then we react and then we're disappointed and we can be vulnerable to being like, well, have I even done the work? And it's like, yes, you have. You're also just human and there was new variables here and we're not perfect and robots every time. Let's use it as a learning opportunity.
Right,
What
but
about this situation triggered you? Like how can you, what do you
like
want
I
to do?
feel
And the other thing, yeah,
like,
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, he had to get to work or he had to get somewhere, and I'm like allowing this guy that I don't even know, right?
Yeah.
But
I mean, the other thing to think about is like sometimes we are making a choice and it's okay. Like I don't ever want people I work with to feel forced or feel like someone's going to judge them if in a moment they chose not to stand up for themselves in a given way, because the reality is we're always calibrating like the pros and cons of showing up in a particular way. And if we're making choices repeatedly to choose others over ourselves, then that's an unhealthy pattern and that doesn't work for us. If there's a given moment where we're like, I don't have it, not necessarily in this car example, but like in general, like I'm choosing, I'm choosing not to say anything or I'm choosing not to stand up for myself. I don't think we have to see that as like, oh, it's undoing all the good work I've done. Like maybe in
yeah,
that moment, that was the right calculated choice to make. And what's important is just that we're clear on the consequences, because there is always a consequence, positive or negative, to the choices that we make.
yeah,
Where we will be empowered to make different lives for ourselves is when we are aware of what we're choosing in the moment, because so much of it is like subconsciously absorbing consequences of our actions when we're not aware. Once you become aware, it's like, okay, so you chose to keep the peace in this argument. That doesn't mean you don't love yourself and that you've
yeah,
undone all the skills. It means
yeah.
that on this Tuesday, that was the better choice. And then you move on, you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, she wasn't concerned at all, so I just thought it was really odd. Maybe her car was already, must have already looked that way, but anyway. So yeah, it was just an example because I'm like, oh my gosh. So, um, yeah, self-love is a journey as well, and I've been on it for quite a while. And I just love, how about like when you do practice a boundary, are you teaching for your clients like to reward themselves or like just, I mean,
Yes. So self-care and affirmation is like a huge part of the course. So I take people through a 10-step process for boundary setting. And one of them is building your self-care plan, which should include giving yourself positive feedback, giving yourself grace, surrounding yourself with people who affirm you. And affirm doesn't mean that people in our lives are just like, yes, you did everything right. That's not what that means. But it does mean that they're recognizing and supporting your effort in the progress of your own healing. They are people who, love you and support you and make you feel good. And I always encourage people to proactively think about what are your systems of self-care before you venture into setting really complex boundaries with people, because it will be triggering and it will be difficult. And ideally, individuals respond well, sometimes they won't. And you want to be planning in advance for like, what are the things that nurture me and make me feel good, so that if when I set this boundary, I don't get the reaction that I want, I'm not like on the floor in the fetal position crying and I don't have anyone to support me. So
Yeah.
it's a big part of it.
Yeah. I think, we cannot allow like I said, other people's, nothing has any meaning except the meaning we give it. Tony Robbins said this a long time ago. I've been listening to Tony Robbins for 30 years, being in real estate and sales and growing up in a negative, kind of critical home, and always knowing I had to work on my mindset. And I'm just now doing the somatic work, where before I was just doing mindset work. But ultimately, nothing has any meaning except the meaning we give it. So when someone doesn't respond, like, we give it meaning that doesn't even exist. Like, it's not real. Like you said, that was one of the questions. Is this true?
Yeah.
Right? I think fear is a big factor. So how do you support your clients when that's their big thing? If you want to give a couple examples of maybe like some boundary setting, we teach people how to treat us. That's the bottom line, right? We teach people how to treat us. So, I mean, I can come up with like an example where I was messaging with someone on online dating, and they wanted to text, and I'm like, I don't have time to text. I don't want to text. I'm not 16 years old. I'm a busy, productive person. And they want to ask like simple questions back and forth. Like, I want a man that says, let's get on a phone call, and have a conversation, right? Schedule a phone call. And I responded and told him in a voice message that, it sounded I prefaced it with like, this sounds mean, but I don't want to text. I'm busy. I'm on the road, I'm productive. And he disappeared after that. But I was like, I have to tell how I want to be treated, like, you just have to listen to that inner voice that's saying, no, I'm not going to settle for, I don't want to text. I'm 56 years old. Like, fucking pick up the phone. Excuse my
Well,
language.
and so this is so important, because this is a perfect example of like, we all have the autonomy to choose how we show up and what we participate in. And going back to what we were talking about earlier of like boundaries versus rules, it's like, you're not telling him, well, you have to call me every day. You have to do this. You have to do that. What you're saying is, I don't participate in dating relationships where texting is 95% of the communication. That's just something I'm not going to do. Now, if that works for you, then great. Let's link up. We'll go out again. We'll see. If that doesn't work for you, hey, no hard feelings. Maybe you're disappointed about it, but ultimately, like, why would we set ourselves up for something that's just going to frustrate and aggravate us down the line? Like, and we have to be able to be okay with that and be able to say, like, that doesn't work for me, and it's not about controlling you. It's not about controlling other people. It's like, I don't participate in arguments that have name calling and yelling.
Yeah.
You can yell and name call for the next 4 hours. I'm just not going to participate. So if that's how the conversation unfolds, I'm going to excuse myself and I'm going to leave the room. Now, if that doesn't work for you because you have to have a partner where you guys duke it out and that's how you like to fight, more power to you, but then we're not compatible, and that's not personal. You're not less than, I'm not less than, we're just not compatible in this space because we have different ways of doing things. And one of the things that I find in an exercise that I use with people in coaching is worst, best, and most likely. So sometimes we have a lot of fear, like, what are they going to say and what's going to happen? And we can get into a space of something called cognitive distortions, which are basically like errors in thinking that skew us towards a more negative outcome than what is objectively likely the case. And one of those cognitive distortions is catastrophizing, where we assume the worst case scenario is going to happen. If I tell my mom that I'm not coming home for Thanksgiving this year because the group dynamic stresses me out and I just can't participate, the worst case scenario is that she's gonna be like, oh, so you just don't want to have anything to do with our family anymore? Fine. I don't need to talk to you either. That's the worst case scenario, is your mom cuts you off because you won't come home for Thanksgiving. Best case scenario is that she's like, wow, I really respect you for honoring your boundaries, and I'd love to see you when it does work for you. Most likely, maybe is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Maybe her feelings are a little bit hurt. She gets a little flustered. You have an exchange that doesn't feel great, but you ultimately get to an understanding where you can affirm this. I still care about you. I value this relationship, but this doesn't work for me. And why? Here are some alternatives. Instead of coming to a group of 40 people for 5 hours where they're going to be discussing politics and that stresses me out. Instead, I'd love to see you the night before and we can do X, Y, and Z. And taking people through this exercise of best, worst, and most likely, where they're actually just writing down what are all of the positive possible things that could happen and building up some cognitive flexibility so that our mind doesn't immediately go to the worst case scenario. And in a group setting, we do this through an activity called hot seat, where someone is like, okay, I'll be in the middle. And again, we can use other people's scenarios if they're not comfortable, but let's say we use the Thanksgiving scenario. And I'm like, I'm avoiding this boundary because my fear is that she's going to cut me off. And then the group fills in like, what else could be the possibility because sometimes we're just stuck. We can't come up with the ideas. We need help. So other people are, well, maybe she'd say this, maybe she'd say that, maybe this, maybe this. And it's building up this flexibility to think about situations differently, which can help bring down some of the fear. So part of bringing down that fear is like cognitive flexibility and realizing maybe the worst case scenario isn't going to happen. Part of that fear then goes back to grounding ourselves in our feelings of worthiness, our belief in God, if that's part of our life sphere, and realizing like, even if the worst thing happened, can I handle that? Do I have the tools for that? Will I still be okay? Am I still a loving and deserving and worthy human being? Yes. Okay. Then with support, I'm willing to step into this space.
Yeah, I think it's so incredible. It's such powerful work. It's so important. And I think that just hearing you talk, which you have amazing communication skills, like I want to take your brain and put it in mine so I can come up with the right
Thank you
word.
for that.
You're welcome. But like the fear of abandonment is what I think is shining through when you say this about family and different things, Thanksgiving and all that. And I personally have a fear of abandonment that I've been healing in the process. So I feel like this core message around boundaries and self-love is literally gonna bring about all these other things like, oh, I have fear of
Yeah.
abandonment. Oh, I have fear
Yeah.
of this. It's like, this is just such like, it's like one thing, but it's so important that like all these other things show up, the worthiness.
So I'm so glad you brought this up because I really want to touch on this point. Sometimes coaching is the right pathway for boundary setting, and sometimes therapy is a more appropriate pathway. And whether what you need really depends on kind of where you are. And sometimes I think that I just want to name a practice that I do that I think other professionals do as well, which is like getting to understand people and what their needs are. And when we're working together, realizing like, okay, cool. This feels like a really good fit, and here's how coaching can help you, and here's the things that we work on. Sometimes it's having a conversation to say like, I would love to support you with XYZ skills. And I think also it may be beneficial for you to have a space where you can go deeper into some of your family of origin stories, prior traumas. And I am always someone who wants to honor that like there are multiple pathways towards growth and healing, and that part of our success, so to speak, comes with finding the right fit and sometimes combining multiple
Mhm.
sources. Because what I don't want to do is misrepresent what coaching is about, and I don't want to misrepresent therapy either. And so I'm glad you brought this up. I think that's a really important distinction within the landscape of service. Yeah.
Yeah. And how would you define like coaching versus therapy?
So for me, it comes down to a couple of things. I think one is that therapy tends to do more looking back to understand how we arrived at the place that we got. So and it requires going deeper. So like when I was talking about the mindset work, there's a certain amount of looking back to understand where our thoughts come from, but it's not a depth of processing. We're not processing people's prior trauma. We're not uncovering family of origin or, childhood wounds or trauma or anything like that. That type of work, that deep personal exploratory backwards facing, understanding how I got here work is more therapeutic. I see coaching as more of a present and future focused, meaning we're assessing current reality and building the skills to take you to a desired place. And therapy does some of that too. And sometimes those things are done in combination. But like, I always want to be really clear around that because I want people to get the support they need. Right. And
Mhm.
I don't want to misrepresent
Yeah.
myself or anyone else in the coaching space as offering something that it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that being a leader, which I do consider myself a leader for many reasons, I do, you know, want to be liked. And I think that it's a challenge when you are a leader to when you want to be liked because you're not gonna no not everyone's gonna like us, right? And then you have to have that, like when you're leading a class or you're leading anything, you have to be able to say certain things to keep it, you know, how do I say, control the situation,
Mhm.
right? Because keep fairness or whatever it is. And I think that so being a leader, how important is having boundaries? I mean,
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, for the reasons we talked about, like
yeah,
it preserves what you have to offer and what you have to lead with, and it helps you to stay focused. Part of like the exhaustion that I was feeling before boundaries definitely impacted my ability to focus or to lead at work, because my mind was here, there, and everywhere, thinking of all the things I had to tie up, all the places I had to go, all the places I had to be. Like, I have
yeah,
simplified my life like
no,
20-fold, and it
I-
allows me to focus and it allows me to lead. And it also, like, part of leadership is modeling. And if we care about other people in our universe and we desire for them to be emotionally healthy and well, then we want to model the practices that we believe will help people get there.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I did not have a role model like that. So, but how I feel about coaching is like, I can help anybody that's 2 steps behind, 5 steps behind, 5 years, 2 years, you know what I mean? And I'm growing and, you know, going here, but we're all doing the work. Like I always repeat, you know,
Absolutely.
you don't brush your teeth once and you're good for a week, or
Yeah.
work out once and you're
Yeah.
fit, right? It's a
Yeah.
continuous thing. And, I'm not the same person I was 2 weeks ago, yesterday, you know, 6 months ago. But yeah, this is so incredible. Tell us about your workshop that you have.
Awesome. I would love to. So I run a boundary boot camp workshop, which is a 2-hour virtual group coaching model with women, where we are supporting one another to build the skills to set boundaries. So we go through a 10-step action plan for boundary setting, or 10-step process rather, for boundary setting. And as we're going through it, it's a working session. So this is not a place to come and just listen to Elizabeth talk, talk, talk. This is like, we're working together. Everybody is participating. It's super hands-on, and people are building their action plan throughout the course, so that when the 2 hours is up, they have a plan of like, oh, this is who I'm going to talk to, and here's what I'm going to say, and here's my self-care plan to build me up, and here's how I'm going to practice. And so they leave really ready to go, and with tools. We love a goodie bag, so there's lots of tools and resources to take with you as you go. But it's a really fun and interactive space. I'm offering it twice in the month of October, on the 17th and on the 20th, and then I'll look at loading up some new dates possibly for November and December. And for folks who are like, I really prefer one-on-one. Sorry, group isn't my thing, I totally understand. I do one-on-one coaching as well. And that people can just sign up for a time slot on my website.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing. Sorry, I forgot this because it's a little farther away. Starting in January, I'm launching a 6-week group where we go much deeper into all of the topics from the 2-hour workshop. So for folks who come to the workshop and you're like, okay, that was really cool, but like I want a little bit more, we have we basically do like an extended course where we go deeper into mindset work, we go deeper into skill building, and that runs it's about 6 weeks at a time. And the first group is launching in January of 2025.
That's amazing. Can you tell us a couple success stories or something like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I love when I like my former clients spontaneously reach out to me, because they're just like this, I don't know, I just imagine them just like thriving, and it's super great. So someone reached out to me recently. She was like, "Oh my God, I keep hearing your voice in my head everywhere I go. You're living rent free in my head. And I just keep hearing you say boundaries, don't require explanation." She's like, "You would be so proud of me. I'm saying no and I'm not feeling guilty about it. I said no to this. I said no to that. I said no to this." And I was so proud of her, because she could feel like she was really empowered, and I could hear the joy and the lightness and the freedom in her voice. And it wasn't that like, oh, she's just a no machine and that she doesn't say yes to anything. Now she says yes to the things that she wants to say yes to, and when she says yes, it's a full yes. I had another former client who reached out to me and was like, "I just want to thank you, because yes, that your session helped me with my boundaries, but also these skills are skills I'm using in my relationship to resolve conflict and to avoid disagreements. Like, my husband and I are not fighting in the same way that we were fighting anymore." Because the thing is, like, the entity of boundary setting is like, it involves so many social and emotional skills that will benefit us in other areas of our life: self-awareness, communication, relationship skills. So all of that in the process of teaching boundaries is also setting people up to be successful relationally in general. I have a former client who's like, I actually like have energy to do stuff and I don't feel bad about it anymore. And like, I'm having fun with my kids because I didn't feel like I had to say yes to every single committee. Like previously was like saying yes to this. And she's like, I said no. And like, now I get to have fun with my kid on the weekends and I'm not just exhausted playing catch up. So
Mm.
it's really great to hear these
I-
stories. And I think it's great when you can see like, they're just lighter, they're just happier, they're more free, and they're living the lives they want to live. And that's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. Freedom. It's really freedom. And
Absolutely.
I love that. I love those stories. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing all of this great stuff. Tell us, like, every time we say yes when we want to say no, how detrimental is that to our self-esteem, self-worth, feeling? How, tell us, like, every time.
All of those are little chips that take away from our energy level, our confidence, our empowerment. And then what ends up happening over time is a settling. Like there's a normalizing of certain bad feelings. We become more familiar with disappointing ourselves. We become more okay with disappointing ourselves. And this is also part of why we have to guard who we are around, because I think unintentionally, when people are hurting and they don't like their circumstance, they either like do something about it to fix it, or they try to cope. And part of how we try to cope is telling ourselves it's okay, this is how it is. How many times have we heard, oh, that's just how bosses are, that's just how men are, that's just how mother-in-laws are. And there's this collective normalizing and settling that is chipping away at any of the hope that we had inside of us to do something different. And so we have to be vigilant in guarding our own yeses and nos, and in guarding the company that we keep and the mindsets that we participate in, because part of why so many people resist boundary setting sometimes is because they have accepted a certain status quo that is way below what any of us deserve. And every time our yes is not a real yes, or anytime we're going along, it's like chipping away at that part of us that knows better and is willing to advocate for the better that we deserve.
Mm, so good. Yeah. I honestly, anytime I say yes when I wanted to say no, and then I experience something, and then I say to myself, well, you didn't really want to go anyway, or
Yeah.
whatever. I always take it as a lesson, like basically learning versus beating myself up, because I always teach my clients that when you want to beat yourself up is when you need to be most compassionate with yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That
And
is absolutely right. And behavior is information. So it's a learning opportunity, like shaming and blaming distracts us from growth because it makes us feel bad and it depletes us. But like there's always opportunity to learn if we're willing to ask the questions. And to the saying yes, like you don't have to be busy to be unavailable. That set me free. When I felt like I could stop responding, I could say no even if I didn't have other plans. I was like, this is amazing.
yeah.
Because then when you're showing up in spaces, it's because you really want to be there and you're
Yeah.
not showing up with your bad, resentful energy.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that so much. Exactly. And it's just powerful. It's super empowering, and I love practicing it. And I love, like, if I get a text from somebody that I used to have to respond and then now I don't, it feels so good. It
So
feels
good.
good. And then when you do respond, when you have time and space and feel like it, because you're like on the couch and you're like, or you're in line somewhere, or you want to, or you feel like it. It's just, and then they don't care. I mean, nobody
Yeah.
cares the time.
Well, and so this is why like building the skills around communication are so critical, because you can have the conversations to manage expectations. So
Yeah.
much of our disappointment in life and in relationships is from unmet expectations, but often these expectations are not reasonable and they were not mutually agreed upon. So
Right.
we're feeling like, oh my God, I gotta text you while I'm driving. I gotta text you all, because, and then
Yeah.
it's like they were never expecting that you responded within 30 seconds. And if they knew that it meant you texting while driving, they would say, talk to me
No.
later. But
Yes.
like, as we need to be having these conversations because we're enduring so much stress and angst from things that just were not communicated.
Absolutely. Expectations is gigantic. I mean, if you set the expectation, like, listen, like I did with the guy, like, I'm not a texter. I am not someone that's going to be texting all day long. That's just letting him know to not expect texting, right? Or responses quickly because I'm on the road most of the day or, so yeah, expectations is so gigantic too. And it just feels better. Like if my son was to say, you know what, I'm going to be off the phone this weekend. I'm going to be staying away from technology. That way you feel better when they don't
Yeah.
respond because they're
Yeah.
just taking time away, right? It's kind of like
Yeah, absolutely.
restoration. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. Like when you say yes, when you wanted to say no, or you do something, like I was doing all this volunteer work, I'll just tell you. And I realized recently that part of that was not aligned with, I was doing it for the wrong reasons almost. And
Mhm.
that was also me choosing to be more empowered and like just paying attention to how I feel and why I'm doing different things, instead of like this guilt or shame being the leading
Yeah,
driver, right? It should be a
absolutely.
choice, right? Like I am a sovereign being, I'm a good person. I don't have to go prove it to anybody, right? That
Yep.
proving energy and like something you said earlier too, I have to say real quick is we don't have to explain ourselves. You said that earlier and I didn't emphasize it like I wanted to, but we don't have to. And we always somehow want to or think we have to.
Yeah, this is so big, and this is part of the role play that we do in the boundary boot camp is we practice not falling for the trap of justifying because your boundaries do not require other people's approval, and they don't require explanation, but we feel subconsciously like they do. Well, I'll say this, when when we are not fully embracing the fact that we deserve to set boundaries and it's not a selfish or guilty or selfish or rude thing to do, when we're not fully there yet, there is this tendency we have to explain it as if we have to justify it to someone else, like to get them to say it's okay for you to set boundaries. And sometimes we even do this with other friends. So like let's say I want to set a boundary with my significant other, and I'm going to go and talk to 3, 4, 5, 6 friends to get them to affirm me that it's okay to set the boundary with this person. It's like we're still outsourcing the approval process, and the North Star is that we are confident in our ability to make these decisions, and we don't have to explain it, we don't have to justify. And part of that is a mindset thing, and then part of it is just a communication thing of breaking the habit. Like how many times do we ask someone for something and before we've even finished our sentence we're like, but if you can't, it's okay, no worries, don't worry about it. It's like
Yeah.
we are conditioned in our speech
Yeah.
patterns to do this. So some of it is mindset, believing we don't owe them the explanation. And then part of it is just building our skills to actually stop ourselves. Like, no, this is the sentence. Stop. Full stop. And
Yeah.
practice that over and over because our
Right.
tendency is to be like, is that okay? Do you mind? I hope you don't, we don't need all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We,
It's funny. I love practicing it because I sent somebody I just started a Shopify account with like some empowerment, like hats and different things. And I was so excited and I was sharing it. And like this one person responded and she's like, oh, I'll have to get something. Now, an old version of me would say, oh, you don't have to. And then I was
yeah.
like, no, I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah.
I'm not going to
If
say
she feels
anything.
like she has to, okay, great.
Or she wants to, whatever.
If she wants
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
exactly.
So good. So good. I was thinking of this guest who was on the podcast, and she was saying that they do not do anything as a family on Sundays, I believe. They literally say no to everything, and it's their time. And she's like, it can be a baby shower, it can be, whatever it is, they don't do it on Sundays. And
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
One day to completely rest, and it's
Absolutely.
important. Yeah, thank you for being here and sharing this. We're going to put all the links in the show notes. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience around what you offer or about?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me and having this conversation with me. I love talking about this. I love hearing from you, and your own journey is remarkable as well. I think if I was gonna say anything, it's just like that for people who are listening that feel like, yeah, but I couldn't do that because everyone feels like I can't do it because, like, and you can. And your journey doesn't have to look like everyone else's. Maybe your boundaries are just you don't check work email on the weekends. Maybe your boundaries are just you don't, go to XYZ. You don't like whatever it is. everyone can have their own story. And I don't want anyone listening to feel like you just don't understand my situation. I could never do that. There's always something we can do. We cannot always change our entire life overnight, nor do we want to, but like everyone has the ability to do these things for themselves. Everybody deserves it. And it's not going to make you a monster that nobody wants to be around. You're not just like suddenly becoming cold. And I just want to encourage people that like you can do it your own way. Like I'm talking about my own journey and the journey of some clients, but like you can do it your way. You can do it on your terms, but you don't have to struggle alone. We endure so much unnecessary struggle trying to do it on our own when support is available. So reach
Yeah.
out.
Perfect. And tell everybody where they can find you.
So the place you'll find me the most is on Instagram. You can also visit my website. It has a little more information. It's www.posa-coaching.com.
I feel like there's going to be more togetherness, something
Definitely.
and I,
Definitely.
whether it's a workshop or maybe I'm doing a
Yeah.
course and you come in and be a guest speaker or
Yeah.
something, we'll figure it out. But yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much for sharing. This has been an amazing conversation.
This is awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.